Well, hello everyone, and welcome to Brivia's Quarterly Solution Spotlight, where the topic we'll be discussing today is how to measure and develop quality leadership. My name is Steve Smit, and I'm Brivia's Vice President of Market Development. If you had the chance to join us in our January Thought Leadership webinar, Brivia's President Stephen DeGroot talked about the ultimate leader responsibility. And in case maybe you don't quite remember what that was, I'll repeat it here. It's the need to understand the impact your leadership is having on your people. So we've had a lot of people asking us since that webinar, how do you do that? And how do you recommend Brivia? How would Brivia recommend that you do that? So that's why we set up today's webinar. Whether you've joined us on a webinar before or today is your first time, we want to give you a sincere welcome. We also want to let you know that we love to interact with our audience. So please use the chat button throughout our presentation here today. Ask any questions you have. We'll get some of them done throughout the presentation, and we're going to save some time at the end of that. So we got about 45 minutes today. Chris will be sharing around 30 minutes of content, and then we'll have time 15 minutes at the end for question and answers. So I'm going to give you a chance to use the chat function right now. I'm joining from my home office, which is in Airdrie, Alberta, Canada, just north of Calgary. I'd love to hear where you're joining us from today. Please say hello and where you're joining us from in the chat. Toronto, welcome. London, nice. Winnipeg, here it's really warm there today. Calgary, more Winnipegs. Welcome. Well, while you're filling up the chat, I'd like to bring in one of my colleagues and one of Brivia's leadership experts, Chris Downey. Chris, where are you joining us from today?
I am joining you all from my basement in frosty Winnipeg, Manitoba. Quite cold this morning here.
Nice, nice. Well, Chris has been a friend and colleague of mine for around 8 years. He started as a customer. Now we get the chance to work together with each other every day. And I can honestly say he's one of the finest leaders I know. So I'm super excited for what he's going to share with us today. And Chris, I'll hand it over to you to let the group know what we'll be discussing today.
Excellent. Thank you, Steve. And thank you all for joining us today. And it's great to see that we've pretty much got the whole country covered, and even some other areas as well, which is just fantastic. I really appreciate you all joining us this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. And before we get into this, I'd love for you to indulge me for just a second, or just a few seconds. And I want you to imagine you're on your way to work. Okay, so you're in your car, or perhaps you're walking. Maybe you're walking down the stairs. I mean, that's what I needed to do to get to my place of work this morning. But imagine you're getting closer to work, and the closer you get, you start to feel an energy build up inside you, and maybe you even feel a little bit motivated and, dare I say, excited to go into work. Okay, so you're entering the doors, or even the virtual doors, in a motivated and excited way. And while you're at work, you find yourself connected maybe with the people connected to the people you're working with, or connected to the work itself. And you're knocking things down, you're accomplishing goals, you're getting stuff done, right? So imagine that. Now the day's wrapping up and you're heading out of the workplace back into the realities of life. And you feel that you actually have capacity to be able to go back into your everyday life and support and contribute to your family and to your community, or whatever it is that you do that fills your bucket. What difference would that make for you if you could be experiencing work like that day in and day out? What difference do you think that would make to your peers, to your colleagues, if that was the experience they had while they were at work? How do you think it might be helpful to our communities if this was the experience that people had at work? You see, at Brivia, we don't think that idealistic state is unrealistic. We think it's actually quite achievable. And I'm seeing here that it becomes infectious. Absolutely. Thank you, Shelley. And that's what I want to talk to you about today in our Solution Spotlight, is how can we create workplaces where people actually feel energized, not just coming into work, but energized leaving work. And in great shape, not just while they're there, but when they're heading back to deal with the realities of life. Right? So there's 4 key things I want to cover with you this morning. As Steve mentioned, we have about 45 minutes together. So the first thing I want to talk with you about is why leadership matters most. And I'm not going to be the only one doing the talking here. I'm going to want to hear from you as well. So keep your fingers close to that chat, because I'm going to want to hear your perspectives here. And thank you for those that are already starting to chime in. So we're going to talk about why leadership matters most. And then we're going to acknowledge the realities of our current state of leadership and the work world that we're confronted with right now. Because this is important. We need to confront our reality, because at times those can be impediments to us achieving that vision that I just talked to you about. And then what I want to talk to you about is how we define quality leadership, because we view leadership as the pathway, to get to that ideal state. And then we're going to end with how to measure it. Quality leadership, what we're saying matters most. Now, as I mentioned, we're here for 45 minutes. So I won't be talking the whole time. I'm going to save lots of time for questions, okay? So there'll be definitely time for questions at the end. But as always, as Steve indicated, feel free to load up the chat with questions as they come in. We have our Brivia team paying attention to this in the Q&A function. You might actually hear Steve chime in every now and again with a few questions if they line up with a section in the talk here. So feel free to keep that chat going, and thank you for participating so far. So let's dive in, okay? Let's start with this. What I'd like you to do now is I want you to connect with, and I'll tell you, it would be awesome if it's right now that you're going through your greatest work experience ever, but if it's not now, connect with a time where you had your greatest work experience ever. Now, for those of you that have participated in a Brivia webinar before, you're probably familiar with this exercise or a version of it. Maybe you've taken one of our programs. But I want you to do that. Connect with your greatest work experience ever. What was that time like for you? Maybe you felt good, you were getting things done, you were inspired. What I'd like you to do, and what I'd like you to load up in the chat, is to share with us what were the key ingredients that made that work experience so great. So put in the chat, what were the key ingredients that made it so powerful? I'm seeing a power leader, which is great. Now, if you are someone that has not had a great work experience yet, and that's unfortunately the reality for some, you can connect with maybe it was you're part of a volunteer organization or part of a team. So if you don't have a great work experience, just think of a great experience. You guys are just loading this up here. I'm seeing this teamwork. We saw leadership, respect, delivery, so you're getting stuff done. Hey, Nick. Judgment-free environment. Connie, thank you. Wow. Supportive supervisor, amazing team. Brenda has not had a great work experience yet. Okay, well, hopefully, Brenda, we can help with that.
Well, Chris, I'm noticing a lot of common things here in the chat. What are you noticing?
Yeah, I'm kind of caught up with reading here right now. I'm seeing autonomy. Absolutely, there is commonality. This is interesting. Thank you, Christina. Having fun. It's very important to one of our team members. In fact, he just recently came up to that conclusion. What a difference that can make. What I'm noticing here, Steve, in all of the comments that are made, that while they're unique, and there's some overlap, but there's definitely some unique pieces here. The common theme that we're seeing in all of these is either directly or indirectly is the impact the leader has on shaping that. Shared focus and vision, for example, impact by the leader. Engaged workplace, leadership impact. Collaborative, inclusive, authenticity. All of these things are either directly or indirectly impacted by leaders. So there's absolutely commonalities to that. And it's no accident that these were these great experiences for folks. And thank you, folks, for lighting this up. You can tell my energy level's probably picking up. The reason this is important is that we believe, and you've just confirmed it for us, that leadership impacts everything. Leadership impacts for the positive, it also can impact for the negative. But quality leadership, that's our primary source, our conduit, if you will, right? For improving motivation, increasing engagement, attainment of preferred performance results, healthy culture. Quality leadership is our primary driver of creating these environments that we would characterize as great. So no surprise that we're seeing that common thread through the chat. But let's dive into this idea of what I'm talking about, leaders impact everything, right? Let's just start with this. We believe at Brivia that leaders are at the center of it all. Now, let me say this. For those of you that are online right now, that our leaders, I'm going to tell you right now, you're being watched. Not being watched through this webinar, but the people in your organization are paying attention to how you behave. They're paying attention. You are always, even whether it's formally or informally, sending out signals throughout the organization. So leaders need to be clear on the vision of the organization and the direction the organization's going, and the values and how we're going to operate as an organization, and what the strategy is, right? What are our goals? What are our objectives? So it's important that leaders have clarity around. We actually call that the compass. But leaders need to have clarity on that. Now, this is where it starts to take the wheels get rolling, the rubber hits the road here. A couple of cliche sayings there for you. How leaders communicate, right? How we behave, the statements that we use, the decisions that we make, the interactions that we have, that has a direct impact on the level of commitment within our organization. What we mean by commitment is the employee experience, engagement, performance, right? The overall level of commitment within the organization is a direct output of how the leaders communicate and behave. And it's that level of commitment that determines the culture that you have. No matter what you say you want your culture to be, it's the level of commitment within the organization that really defines the culture that you have. And it's that culture that's going to determine your ability to convert. And what we mean by conversion is your ability to convert on results, whatever they might be. Perhaps you're working in healthcare. I know we've got a lot of friends in health. They're joining us today. That could be your patient outcomes. That could, if you're in manufacturing, that can be productivity. It could be profit, depending on your organization. Whatever the results you are set out to attain, your culture is going to determine how effective you can do that in a consistent way. We like to say all roads lead to leadership, right? So let's just work this backwards. If you're not getting the results in your organization that you achieve, that you desire, right? The ideal state, well, we can link that back to leadership. If your culture is struggling, it's most often a manifestation of how the organization is led. If engagement is a concern, or maybe it's high. Okay, I don't want all of these negative. Maybe it's high. Leadership impacts that. If it's low, leadership has an impact. And of course, if communication is something you struggle with, leaders have an impact. So leaders have an impact on everything, which makes quality leadership all the more important. So let's look at this. So let's think now about our current state. So I said I want to talk about our current state. Let's acknowledge some of the realities that we're confronted with right now. Okay, actually, what I'm going to share with you, what's interesting, the stats and the facts I'm going to share with you now, these predated the pandemic. Okay, so these actually predate the pandemic. The pandemic has actually exacerbated the situation and made it worse. What we're seeing in the workplace now are increasing levels of sick leave. I don't mean just taking a day here and there. We're seeing people go on long-term disability due to stress in the workplace. Again, even predating the pandemic. It's easy for us to kind of hang our hat on the pandemic as being all of the problem, but this was something we were struggling with before. Burnout had reached unacceptable levels. Before the pandemic, the World Health Organization called it, they identified that burnout was at epidemic levels. So before the pandemic, we actually had an epidemic, and that was burnout, right? And for sure, I'm seeing, well, Jeff, stress or toxic work environments, absolutely, these contribute to burnout, to these increased sick leaves. Thank you for that contribution, Jeff. And lastly, resignation, and we're seeing that in high levels now, right? We were actually working with a client just this week that reached out for some help, and they're seeing attrition rates in excess of 40%, which is absolutely amazing. So these were present, as I mentioned, before the pandemic. The pandemic has made it worse. So we have a problem here. So we can call it engagement, call it motivation, we can call it a productivity problem. We have an issue. And what's interesting, I put engagement up here because the thing that amazes me about engagement, and Steve, it was interesting, is we met each other, through work. It was actually through an engagement survey that Steve and I started doing some work together. And what's interesting about engagement, we've been talking about it for over 20 years, right? And it's been identified as an issue. But what amazes us is that at best, we've flatlined on engagement. And in many cases, it's going down. At times, we'll throw some resources towards it. We see a marginal uptick in engagement, but we ultimately settle back down to that level. They're saying that 18% of employees are actively engaged with an organization. That's a global stat, which is unbelievable. But what amazes us is that we've been talking about it and we've been throwing resources at it for the last 20 years, and it's not getting better. Now, we've managed to navigate through and skate through this on, I'll say, subpar engagement for a number of years, and we're getting by with that. But you throw the pandemic and its pervasive and its prolonged nature into the equation, more than ever now, we're seeing our staff, if they haven't burnt out, they're at serious risk of burnout. It's not this, we used to use this slide, say it will result in mass attrition. It is resulting in mass attrition, right? Staff that remain, so this is a term that Steve DeGroot has started using, and I agree with it, is the staff that remain, they're working wounded. And we know when we're wounded, be it physically, emotionally, psychologically, our ability to be at our best, this is compromised, of course, right? All the bad things are getting worse. Now, I didn't invite you here. We didn't invite you here to bum you out this morning. I just wanted to acknowledge where things are at. Not everywhere, but in a lot of cases. This is, some of you online right now might be actually experiencing, work in this way. But what's our pathway out of this? How do we get from the current state to what we talked about, back to those great work experiences that we have? And we believe quality leadership is the pathway. And thank you, Karen, for your comment there. For sure, that is the reality many people are experiencing right now. Absolutely. We believe that the pathway out of that is quality leadership. And we don't believe it actually to be as difficult as we've made it out to be. You all just highlighted in that greatest work experience, some called out leadership specifically, and others in a roundabout way identified leadership as one of the key contributing factors to your greatest work experience ever. So what are the positive effects to quality leadership? And feel free to actually put it in the chat. Quality leadership, load us up in there, but I'm going to throw a few in there. Culture, healthy culture, right? Quality leadership fosters a healthy work environment. Engagement increases when people are experiencing quality leadership. And I love Jeff's point, simple, not easy, for sure. I love it, Jeff, and we're going to get to that. You're absolutely right. Engagement, mental health. This is one of the things I want to be clear. Quality leadership is not going to solve all issues of mental health, but I will say this. The workplace should not be contributing to those issues, and quality leadership can help with that. Resilience. Quality leadership builds resilience at individual levels, at organization-wide level, at organization levels. Motivation. People report when they're experiencing quality leadership, an overall sense of well-being. And thank you for loading these up. Absolutely. Good communication, Don, is a great contributor to quality leadership. And of course, less attrition is an output here. But this is the interesting thing. So through the work that we've done, when we started talking to people about what makes for quality leadership experience, that we've worked with hundreds of organizations and thousands of employees. And what's amazing, and I want to be clear about this, many of the people we've worked with to develop our approach and the work that we do work in very difficult environments. We've worked with organizations that are dealing with acquisitions and are during economic downturns they're struggling with. Our president, Steve DeGroot, has done extensive work in the prison system. He's worked with teams and participated in child death reviews. So there has been teams that we have worked with that are dealing with very difficult situations. But what's amazing is even in those very challenging situations, depending on the level of leadership they're experiencing, people can report that they're doing well. They're feeling good, right? And this is key. Of all of the teams that we've worked with that reported doing well, there were two key things that were happening that led to that overall sense of well-being. The first is this. They had trust, their leader trusted them, and they could trust their leader. That was the first. So high levels of trust with their leader. And the second from their perspective was that they had the support of their leader. So when people feel trusted by their leader and they can trust their leader and they are feeling supported, or at least perceived level of support by their leader, they report doing well, even in difficult situations. I'm willing to bet if I went back to your greatest work experience and is to ask you in that time, was everything, was money just flowing in and everything was great? No, I'm sure there were challenges that you were facing, right? But even in that, you're able to have a great experience. So how do we create quality leadership experiences? As someone had mentioned, it's simple, but it can be hard to do. Right? How can we create an environment where the trust is high and people are have a perceived level of support by their leaders? Let's dig in on this. So while there's many contributing factors to creating quality leadership experiences, as you've all alluded to, we have boiled it down to 5 key factors. We call them leadership domains. That when employees are experiencing these things in high levels, they report doing well, right? They report a quality leadership experience. So let's dive into these, shall we? It starts with respect. What we mean by respect is genuine consideration for the overall well-being of the employees. Admiration for them as people, for their contributions, for their abilities. Treating people with kindness is key, right? That's respect. Integrity. Leaders with a strong moral character that approach their teams with honesty, humility, and courage, and truth. And I saw it in the chat here. People often equate walk the talk with leaders that exhibit integrity in how they work. Empathy, no surprise here, right? A genuine care and concern for the people leaders are responsible for, right? And what's interesting about that is we want leaders that can listen, but not just listen, it's listen to understand and validate the experience that people are having, and even connect with maybe how they're feeling in a moment, in a challenging moment, right? Through this crisis that we've been dealing with would be a great example of that. As no surprise, we're talking about trust and supportiveness. Supportiveness is one of the key leadership domains. And that's leaders that are encouraging and flexible and helpful, that have a genuine interest in the growth of their employees and even advocate on behalf of their employees. And a saying, so if we say integrity, people say they walk the walk. The saying you often hear that's linked to supportiveness is, they've got my back. When we feel our leaders have our back, right? That's that perceived support from our leadership. And the last piece to this puzzle is performance. What we mean by performance is clarity around goals, objectives, roles, expectations. People need to know what's expected of them. So it's the interplay of all 5 of these domains that create quality leadership experiences. I hear someone came off mute there.
Yeah. Hey, Chris. Steve? Yeah. No, there was a question that came in on the chat around these domains. Is there one that Brivia has found is really the most important one, or kind of the key one in all these 5 domains?
So like there's one kind of have a heavier weighting type of idea. Well, that's interesting. So it's a great question. Thank you for asking it. The reality is each one of these domains, they have equal weighting. And the reason for that, and some of you probably connected with this in different ways, right? Whether it was integrity might have been important to some of you, performance might have been important to others. As I mentioned, it's the interplay of all 5. However, this is key. It all starts with respect, okay? So while they're all important, if our employees don't feel genuine, that we're considerate of them and that we actually care for them, then we're going nowhere. So all 5 are important, but it all starts with respect. I hope that answered the question. If it didn't answer some, we could talk deeper in the Q&A period. Thanks for chiming in there, Steve. But this is important. I don't think I put anything up here that you don't already know. right? And when we go back to your greatest work experience, and even when I took you to a little imagination exercise, we've touched on this. But if we've known this for years, that respect is important, integrity is important, and supportiveness is important, why are we struggling? Why are we struggling? Well, this is the key. Now, as I mentioned before, we've worked with hundreds of organizations and thousands of leaders. And one of the things that we've uncovered is that we've learned to, and we know to be true, is that leaders want good things for their people. They have positive intent. One of the questions we often ask leaders, whether it's through coaching or through our leadership development, we ask a series of questions, but we ask, what do you want for the people you're responsible for? And we always hear amazing things when people answer that question. In fact, Steve DeGroot and I were doing some work together a few years back. We were brainstorming. We had flip charts all over the meeting room wall. And we were categorizing leaders into 3 specific categories. And these were the categories. First, leaders that get it and know how to do it. The second was leaders that get it, but aren't quite sure how to do it. And then the third was leaders that don't care. And this is a real turning point for us because we actually stopped and said, have you actually met a leader that doesn't care? This is important. I'm not suggesting for a moment there are not leaders out there right now that are behaving poorly and they're creating toxic environments. Absolutely, that's happening. So I don't want to diminish that. For some, they're experiencing leadership in a very different way. But what we have come to realize is that when you ask leaders, what do you want for the people you're responsible for, they say good things. No one ever says, I want my people to feel like garbage. I want them to feel insignificant. I want them to feel small. They don't say that. But here's the issue. Our intent to be great leaders is not enough. Intent to be great is not the measuring stick for great leadership. The impact that we have as leaders is. And that's the challenge. So we have people focusing on developing leaders. They look outward, they look to books and they look to courses, and that's all good to develop our intent. But what we have found, in some cases, it's a narrow gap. In other cases, it's a chasm. But it's a gap nonetheless. And the only way for us to get to better leadership is to close that gap. Right? It's to close the intent impact gap and come up with a shared understanding of how we're experienced as leaders. Now, in order for us to move there, this is an important piece. That you can't leave a place unless you first arrive. For those of you that are familiar with us, you have heard this before. And the reality is this: if you desire to be a better leader, to create great leadership experiences, you need to arrive at understanding of how your leadership is experienced right now. Step out of leadership for a moment. Let's just think about maybe still early in the year, you want to get healthy, you want to lose some weight, become more fit. Sooner or later, you need to get on the scale to find out where you're at, or you need to assess your fitness level so you know whether or not you're improving. Right? That's the challenge. How can we help leaders have the impact that they desire? How can we close that gap? Now, that is exactly what we set out to do when we just developed what we call the Core Leader Score. And the Core Leader Score is to do just what we've been talking about, to measure what matters most, and that's quality leadership. Now, this doesn't just come out of nowhere. I was mentioning Steve DeGroot before. This comes down to years and years of research. Those 5 leadership domains aren't accidental. They came from lots and lots of research. Again, not just research at Brivia, research elsewhere all supports those 5 leadership domains. But what we set out to do was, how can we actually measure this? Right? So we created the Core Leader Score. Now, there's lots of assessments out there. There's no question about it. There's lots of assessments out there. But what makes the Core Leader Score different? Well, there's a few differences. I've got them up on the screen. But what I want to highlight, one of the key differentiators between the Core Leader Score and other assessments is this. It's built on this premise. The only people that can tell us how effective you are as a leader are the people that are experiencing your leadership. That's it. Right? Now, it's great to know what our peers think. It's great to know what our managers think. That's all important information. But the only people that can really tell us how effective you are as a leader are the people experiencing your leadership. So the core leader score is built based on the experiences of your direct reports. Now, this is interesting because the way it's set up, it's a behavioral-based assessment. So it's free of personality or values biases. We're asking questions. Either the leader does this or they don't do it, or they do it some of the time, right? So this kind of rules out whether they like you or they don't like you. If they're checking in on you, they're doing that. So it's a behavioral-based assessment. And what's important here, often when we say we're going to be assessing quality leadership, it can make people a little bit nervous. This is a strengths-based assessment. So even if you're someone that's struggling with your leadership, something's going well. And we start there first. We actually focus on your strengths, and then we build from that point. As it's built off these specific leader qualities that we're talking about. It's not generalized values, it's tangible, right? As I mentioned, it's behavior. It's a link to these qualities so people can actually action against it. Probably what we're most excited about is its development without interruption. So it's oftentimes, and we're busy, and again, we're dealing with, there's a lot less people working right now. People are either off sick or they've resigned. So we often hear this, we can't take the leaders off the floor, or we can't take them off the line. Well, this is designed that doesn't necessarily have to happen. So you can actually get the assessment and start to just take real world steps for steps to improve quality leadership. So let's talk about this. How does this work? I'm seeing for sure, we'll put one in there. I'll have one in here in just a minute. So Tanya, thank you. It's like you were replaced here for it. So how does this work? Well, we ask staff, right? So we start by talking to the employees and we ask a series of questions, right? So let's just use one. Tanya just asked a question. Here's an example. Instead of using John Doe, let's say Chris. Chris is a good role model, and role models what is expected, right? There's a question that comes in. So we ask staff, it takes about 15 minutes for them to complete. From their perspective, how are they experiencing Chris's leadership or whoever's leadership, right? And again, behavioral based. And all of the questions are linked back to these 5 leadership domains that we've talked about. So every behavior is tied back to one of these leadership behaviors, and they're all connected. Okay, so it starts by asking the employees about their experience. That's an important part. If we're going to try and understand the impact you're having, we need to hear from them. And as soon as they're done, what happens is a tailored report gets issued to the leader. So the leader, not immediately, but very, very quick turnaround, ends up with a tailored report, and that covers 3 main things. The first is they find out what their score is, and it's broken down to each one of those domains. There's an overall score, and they find out how they're doing in each domain. We identify their top leader strengths, and that's actually bolstered by reinforcing messages from the team. And of course, then there's key areas for development. So leaders get a tailored report, and against those key areas of development, I mentioned development without interruption. We immediately trigger tips that can be sent based off their report. Here's things they can start to do to increase their leadership capacity and their overall score. What comes along with the core leader score is actually a manager's discussion guide, which is really a step-by-step guide for leaders to review their report, take action on it, and engage their teams in meaningful conversations to understand it. So we put this in to make sure that they can actually take action immediately. But this is key. There's more to it than that. One of the things we're excited about is the core leader score gives the right information to the right people. Okay, so some of you online might be in charge of HR, or maybe you're a COO or part of the executive team. Well, what the CLS does, what we do is provide organization-wide reporting so you can actually see how leadership is experienced in your organization. And what that gives you the opportunity to do is to actually pinpoint where you need to develop leadership. So maybe you're struggling in the area of performance. Maybe you're struggling as an organization in the area of supportiveness, or maybe you can enhance things in the area of respect. This actually gives you data to focus your development dollars on. For those of you that might be in L&D, I certainly have been. That's when I met Steve. I was actually in organizational development. I was responsible for leadership development. Sometimes we're throwing the dart in the dark around where should we focus our development for everyone. The Core Leader Score gives that insight to organizations. While that's happening, though, the individual leaders, they have their own report that they can actually execute against themselves to enhance their respective leadership capacity. So the leadership is, the Core Leader Score is designed to, we can actually run this for one leader and focus on that one leader. You can run it across the organization or anywhere in between. Now, if we do this organization wide, it just elevates, the level of development that can occur. But even at an individual level, leaders can improve. So I want to leave time for questions here. I realize I'm coming up at probably about 35 minutes past here. Here's just 3 questions I want to ask you, points to consider. And I see these questions in there, and I know Steve has them lined up for me, so I'll be happy to answer them. But I want you to think about this. Do you know the impact that leadership is having in your organization? Do you know the impact that leadership is having in your organization? Actually, feel free to answer in the chat if you want to. And if you do, awesome. Do you know the experience that your employees are having relative to leadership? That's first question. Second question, are you concerned with the level of employee engagement or turnover in your organization? Right, so that's a concern. Last question, maybe, do you want to improve your leadership capacity? I'll tell you folks, if you've answered yes to this, maybe you answered yes to all of these questions, I'm telling you, reach out. We can help you with this. And it does not need to be that hard. Okay, I've done a lot of talking. Steve, there are a number of, thank you, Tracy, yes to all those questions. Steve, well, there's some, I see questions in the chat. Let me know what people are saying.
Yeah, Chris, absolutely. Thank you. Great job. And that was a lot of awesome information. One of the questions that came up is how is this different or better than a 360? Is this a 360 or can you kind of go into that a little bit, the comparison to 360s?
Yeah, that's a great question for sure. So how this differs from a 360 is, as I mentioned, it is based on the experience of the people that are actually experiencing your leadership. See, in a 360, we talk to the leader and we talk to the peers and how they're experiencing it. And that's important stuff, don't get me wrong. But that doesn't really tell us how the leadership is actually being experienced. And what we have found with 360s, I've had them myself. The moment you get your report, the first thing you drill into is, what is my leader saying about me? Right? Because I need to make sure I'm in good with my leader. But the reality is, what really matters is the experience of our employees. So we want to make sure that the effort gets focused on those that are experiencing leadership. And again, not that your peer-to-peer information is not important, it is. But this, how it's different from 360s is it's directly focused on creating positive leader-member exchanges. I'll tell you this, leadership, our leaders, if our leaders can't have open and honest conversations with us and they need to use the survey to give us that feedback, that's an issue as well, but that's a little higher up the chain. So there is absolutely a difference here. I don't want to, there are some good 360s out there. I don't want to slam them all, but that's a unique difference.
Okay, thank you, Chris. There are a lot of questions around environment. So a couple of questions rolled up here into one.
Yeah.
Are there certain industries that it works better with? Unionized versus ununionized? How does this work with small organizations? Maybe you can kind of run the gamut of organizations we've worked with this before.
Yeah, well, so we have worked in tech, we have worked in health, we have worked in manufacturing with leadership. We've covered them all, and it applies in all industries. Now, I saw the comment about unionized environments versus not, and we've used it there as well. And this is the key. When you go into a unionized environment, getting the Core Leader Score is not about assessing performance and making decisions based off whether or not you hire or fire the leader. And that's where the only concern comes up in the unionized environment. This is about giving meaningful information to the leader so they can develop and grow in their role. So it applies in all situations, because the commonality, no matter what industry that you're in, is you have people leading people. And that's what this is about. It's about making sure that the people that you're leading have the clarity that they need to do the jobs, and they have a meaningful connection with their leaders. Does that make sense?
Yes, that does. Absolutely. And folks, we still got a few more minutes left. I got a few questions for you, Chris, but if there's
Sure.
any other questions, put them in
Yep.
the chat, please.
Mhm.
Um, Chris, a couple questions around the cost and how we help organizations. Number one, like what is the cost of the tool? And
Mhm.
number two is how do we help organizations really calculate the ROI of great leadership and perhaps the
Oh yeah,
ROI of our tool?
the
Yeah.
ROI question, right? The bane of the existence of those of us in L&D. Well, first, from a dollars and cents perspective, it all depends on the size of the organization, honestly. So I can't throw a specific price here, but I will say on a per leader cost, it's very, very inexpensive. The core leadership, we designed it to be cost effective. We want to make this accessible. We can't make the impact we want if people can't access it. So it's a very reasonable per leader cost. Now, the ROI one's an interesting one because we get asked this question often around development. What's the ROI? Let me throw this out at you here. And because we've been asked this question a bunch, what's the cost? So we're seeing higher attrition rates than ever. Conservatively, we've found the cost to rehire and retrain. So if we're losing frontline employees, and we've all heard this saying before, people don't leave your organization, they leave your leader, leave the leader. Now, it's not always true. But in many cases, the leader has a significant impact on the decision someone makes to walk away. So if we could reduce how often people leave, the frequency, this is some conservative estimates that we've uncovered. To replace a frontline employee, the cost to replace a frontline employee can cost 50% of their annual salary. So that's a frontline employee. It's 50%. So think about every frontline employee that you lose that potentially is impacted by the poor state of leadership, that's half the salary it's going to cost to bring somebody in. If it's a mid to senior level employee, that goes up to 150% of the salary. So it doesn't take long to tally up how many people we've lost. And even if we could cut that number in half, I'll tell you, the core leader score doesn't come near the cost of even one of your losses. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I think you hit that one pretty good there, Chris.
Steve, I can't help. I gotta jump on this for a moment because
Sure.
when we talk about ROI, one of the things that's interesting to me is that when we're looking at our KPIs in organizations, right? Usually, you talk to an organization, they can tell you two things. They can tell you down to the cent, or at least down to the dollar, what the profit and loss was last quarter. Right? They can tell you if you're a manufacturing or production organization, they could tell you how many vials left that facility or what their output was, right? Down to the unit level. But when we ask the question, what's the level of what's the level of leadership in your organization, they can't answer, right? And what's interesting about it, many of our measures of success are lagging measures. So what I mean by that is when we find out a profit loss, it's too late. We've already made the money or we lost the money. We didn't hit our production numbers. That's a lagging measure. A leadership measurement is actually a leading measure. So if you can get a handle on that, that leads to success in those lagging measures. Sorry, that was my own stuff. I had to say that. Go ahead, Steve.
No, that's great. No, that's great. Chris, there's no other questions in the chat. Perhaps you want to go on to the next slide, unless you had any closing thoughts you wanted to share.
No, I think, Steve, I'll let you take it over here. I wanted to thank you all for just listening to what we've had to say here. And as I mentioned, if you did answer yes to those questions, don't be afraid to reach out. We're not going to pressure you anything. We just want to help you out. So do reach out. And Steve, I'll hand it over to you. Thank you, everyone, and have a great day.
Perfect. Thanks, Chris. And thank you for your presentation today. And folks, I just wanted to reiterate Chris's point. One of our key values at Brivia is to meet our customers where they're at, or the folks that inquire where they're at. So feel free to reach out. I have a QR code here on the screen that you can take a picture of. It's going to take you to more information around our core leader score. As part of the follow-up that I'll be sending tomorrow morning, it will include the recording, information about our core leader score, and then our upcoming webinar. Chris, I'm wondering if you can go to that slide just about our upcoming webinar. You do a quick information on that. So folks, we want to make sure you know about this. This is exactly 1 month away, but this is going to be a can't miss webinar, talking to COO and president of Seven Oaks General Hospital, Brenda Baduke, and how their organization actually endured the incredible pandemic that we're hopefully just coming out of right now. So it's going to be a great conversation between myself and Brenda and Steve DeGroot, our president, who helped them all throughout the situation. So folks, we want to thank you again for joining us today. We're so excited that you joined us, and we will be following up with information shortly. In the meantime, please reach out with any questions that you have. Thanks so much and enjoy the rest of your day.